back, and this time we're talking animation. Welcome to the showcase, everybody. This is something we have been dying to do for everything, for design, for 3D, and today I lied. Yesterday I said design was my favorite thing, but actually it's animation. And we have an amazing TA, School of Motion person, animator, designer extraordinaire. Today we also have Sarah on with us. Sarah, hello, are you there?
I am here.
This is something I have been so excited to do, and I'm thrilled that we actually have you on board as well. Can you just give us a little bit of background on who you are and how animation, if it's important to you, if you love it, if you hate it, what's animation to you?
Animation is everything to me, and that makes me sound maybe kind of boring to anyone who's not an animator, but I wake up thinking about it. I go to sleep thinking about it. I've been doing it for a really long time. I started doing animation when it was still like Flash was a thing. I don't want to give my age away too much, but it was a thing when I started, and I've done some 3D, lots of 2D. I really love the creative code aspect, expressions and After Effects and all that jazz. Been working with School of Motion since about 2016, and here I am today.
Amazing. Well, you're the perfect person to be talking about all these classes. Today, we're going to cover students from After Effects Kickstart, Animation Bootcamp, Advanced Motion Methods, like kind of our vertical of animation classes. I have to ask, which of these classes have you actually taken? I'm going to bet at least one of them.
I have TA'd for After Effects Kickstart, Animation Bootcamp, Expression Session. I have taken Advanced Motion Methods when it first came out, but I have not TA'd that class just yet.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Are there any quick tips before we dive into what everybody else is doing from all those different classes? Is there a tip, like something quick you can think of that you could give to people about keyframes or curve editing or timing or spacing? Anything you can think off the top of your head? I'm putting you on the spot.
You got to touch all the curves, every single one of them.
Now,
and I know that
F9? Just hit F9? Just grab all and hit F9 once? Oh man, it's harder than that?
Yep, you got to go in the graph and you got to see all the curves and know them like they're your best friends.
That's amazing. Yeah, that is good. It is kind of funny how, like, I don't know if you ever have this situation, but when I'm in like curve editors, whether it's Cinema 4D or After Effects long enough, I actually have dreams of just being like tangled up in like tangents and splines, and like I'm trying to find that one key that I can't like get, and I'm like, it's messed up. You know that, like, maybe you've been animating a little too much if you dream in spline. That's kind of scary.
Yeah, right. But if you could have the good dreams where you're like water sliding down the curves, and
I'll pay for those. Yeah. Shoots and ladders. That would be amazing. I wish it was actually like that. So before we just dive into like nerding out too hard about animation, let's just start talking about After Effects Kickstart. Like, I think part of what this showcase today is to just explain to people like which animation class might be for them. You know, we'll show what people have done in them, but maybe you can help us, since you've TA'd or you've actually like been in these classes. Maybe you can cue up a little bit about After Effects Kickstart in terms of like, who is it for and what can you expect to kind of come out of knowing?
Yeah, After Effects Kickstart, I actually get a surprising range of people in that class, because it's great if you've never opened After Effects, right? You're just like, how do I do this animation thing? After Effects Kickstart will kind of take you from nothing to having a pretty good handle on how to use the software. But I've also gotten a lot of students in that class where they've been using After Effects for a while. Maybe they've been cobbling together tutorials from YouTube or wherever else, and they just don't feel like they have a strong foundation in like how it all fits together. And so that's a good one too, if you've been using it for a while, but you don't really feel like you have the whole picture. So you can get that whole picture in After Effects Kickstart.
Yeah, it's an amazing class. Noel Hana teaches it. And it's honestly, I still think, if you, like you said, if you've been using After Effects for 5 years, 10 years, the way he teaches it, it's very like, I say easy breezy all the time. It's very like laid back, and it's enjoyable to watch, but there's almost always something like expert level that he happens to just like kind of just almost glance over, and you're like, wait, what did you just say? Let me rewind, because there's a lot of just little pro tips to kind of sprinkled in. Before we dive in, the goal for this entire showcase is that we're going to show you what it's like in a class to actually get a TA critique. Sarah has actually gone into every student that we're showcasing today and recorded a video showing you what it's like to actually like submit something and then see what the feedback is coming in. So before we do that, I would just love to remind anybody watching the stream, if you have any questions for myself, for Sarah, if you're wondering about the courses themselves, if there's something that you're not sure about or you might have heard of, please drop those in. We are watching it and we will address them as soon as they come in. And also, at the end of all this, we're going to talk about AEK, we're going to talk about Animation Bootcamp, and then we have a special guest. We have Katrina Suhu, who actually has taken advanced motion methods, and we're going to go and dive into one of her class assignments, and we're going to talk to her about what the process was like finishing the assignment and why she even came to the class and how she discovered school motion. Take a look at her website because she has a lot of really diverse work. If you have any questions for Katrina, now's the time to start thinking about those and submitting them into the chat, and we'll have those ready for her when we get to her. But I think we should just go ahead and hop in for After Effects Kickstart. Let's take a look at the critique. Who did you critique for After Effects Kickstart, Sarah?
I believe After Effects Kickstart was Xavier.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a great assignment. Actually, one of my favorite Wow Factory assignments that I think I've ever seen because it's got so much personality.
And it has a lot of moving parts. That's a fun thing about this assignment. We'll talk about it more, but there's a lot of stuff going on, which A, is hard to just do it all, but B, it's really hard to keep attention on where you're supposed to go. But I think Javier did a really good job with it. All right, if we want to roll that, and then we'll come back afterwards. If you want to talk a little bit while we're waiting for this, Sarah, any kind of comments at all on like what the kind of challenges are for this assignment? You basically are given a set of designs, and are they already rigged? Or are they already built for controllers? Or are people building those? What's the setup for?
No, so you get basically a whole bunch of pieces, and the students have to put them together. I think this is the first assignment where it's a lot of layers, right? It really starts to get into like what it's like to work day to day as a motion designer, because you do have dozens and dozens and dozens of layers, and it's all about linking them up, rigging those up to look like arms, making sure that they move and bend in the right places. And then of course you've got this whole sequence of things that has to happen, and you don't want to have all of that happening at once, right? So it's a little bit of storytelling, kind of leading the eye through what's happening and guiding the viewer through this experience. So it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. We'll talk more about that challenge when we get into it. But I think we have this queued up now. Let's see how these little robot arms move. Oh no!
So close.
So close. Those robots are revolting.
Okay, Sarah here, checking out a Wow Factory assignment. I'm going to just let this play while I talk about it. So this assignment can be very daunting, especially to those brand new to After Effects, because it's a lot of moving parts, right? A lot of moving parts, a lot of anchor point attention, a lot of parenting, and parenting that maybe changes throughout the piece. So a lot of stuff. You have done an excellent job here of taking care of all that basic stuff, right? The anchor points are in the right place. The arms are bending where they should logically bend. Nothing seems misaligned. So awesome job on that. On top of that, there's a lot of details here that are working well. So these arms sort of start to wake up, and it almost looks like they're thinking, right? Those numbers animate one at a time. Those kind of details can really take your animation to the next level. So it's fantastic that you did that. I love this interaction between the first two arms. That kind of thing it's above and beyond, right? Just making the moves happen, right? You could just have the first arm do the thing, the second arm do the thing, third arm, fourth arm, and just call it a day. But instead you elected to have the first arm do the thing, the second arm sort of think about doing the thing, and then look to the first arm, and then they sort of interact a little bit about it, right? He's like looking to him, what are you doing? And then he does the lever thing, and then number two kind of thinks, oh, I don't know, am I going to do this? And then number one sort of says, yeah, do the thing. So that is awesome, right? You've given personality to an inanimate thing, right? A non-living thing, which is something only animators can do, right? So kudos on that. A couple of things that I think could be just next leveled if you ever get back to this. This is a great piece. It's absolutely working really well, but some things are not working quite as well as they could be. So let's go back to the beginning. These first two little kind of wake up moves, they're so quick and they're so sort of fast that they can easily be overlooked, and they almost feel like a mistake, right? So at worst they feel like a mistake, at best they're, not really a feature. So you might give that a little more time, right? Have them sort of yawn or, wake up their mouths a little bit. Just give the viewer a little more time to sort of digest that, or maybe a little bit more time to see each of those things happen. When we get into, so all this stuff here is working great. I'm going to just let it play until we get to the next part where I think we can next level it. Okay, so we get into this guy. He's being very, very careful to avoid that. I think that's really great. But now we have a little bit too much going on at once. Let's go back just a bit. So we're focused on this arm and this arm. So like, who's the star, right? Who's the star of the shot? You always want to have like sort of a starring actor and supporting actors. And right here, it's not super clear. So I think maybe some timing changes, or maybe just a little bit of difference in when each arm does which thing, could give the viewer a more clear focus. And then finally, and this is just really maybe a style choice, when this guy picks up the thing and arm number 3 tosses that key, I think that's fantastic. I think that's working really well. And I think that this section up here, where arm number 4 is kind of going back and forth, I think you could really exaggerate that. Imagine that he's like this outfielder, right? Staring at the sky. Like, he could go back and forth a few more times. Like, oh, where is it? Is it coming down? Is it coming down? I'm not sure. And then really kind of delay that gratification. And that gets into sort of acting and comedic timing, all of those things you're exploring here and doing an awesome job with. That's just a suggestion for how you might take it to the next level. Overall, I think this assignment is working really well. You not only did all of the technical things that we asked you to do, but you added some personality and some story to it. So that is a fantastic demonstration of your abilities as an animator.
Again, we did this a lot yesterday during the design thing, but it's so tough to manage so many things. I really believe like an animator's like career arc kind of follows 3 kind of major challenges, right? Like, first you struggle with just the tools, right? There's so much just to learn about, like how to move something, how to get everything working and being efficient at just doing it. Then you get into motion, the different types of motions, like how to make something feel staccato, how to make something feel super smooth. And it's not just do you animate on 1s or 2s or, hit F9 like we were joking earlier. But then the last step, and a lot of animators never even really get a chance to get to this, especially in motion design, it's acting. It's trying to create emotion out of the movements that you're doing. I think it's amazing that Xavier was really able to nail all of that in this one. There's so many different factors. Can you talk just a little bit about that? Like, watching this makes me want to actually do this exercise because there's so many different ways you could take it.
I know, it's so good, right? So I think when you start this exercise as the student, you need to, first of all, you need to sort through the million different pieces. You're given all this artwork, right? And it's just all in parts. So you have to sort through that, but then you have to make the decision, right? Like, so what is this? Is this going to be a comedy? Are these going to feel alive? Are they going to feel robotic? Are they angry? Are they happy? Are they sad? You have to think about what that story is that you're telling, and that's going to inform everything that you do throughout the rest of the assignment.
Yeah, that's something we even saw yesterday when we were talking about design, is that in the critique itself, that's one thing I love that you did, Sarah, was that you can talk about the technicalities, right? Like, does this thing feel smooth, or does it feel like it's happening at the right time? Are you giving people time enough to watch the main action while you're transferring the eye over to the next set of action without letting those things die, right? Like, they were alive for a moment. When it moves over, they still have to do something to keep it alive. But what I thought was really nice about your critique was what you said at the end with that arm, where it was like it was just going to catch something. That's even like the next step or the next level that you can take, is that you have all 4 of these. They'll have a personality, but they may have different personalities, right? Through your animation, you might have one that's cocky and one that's super confident. You might have another one that's scared, or that one might be trembling in anticipation for, oh, I know I'm going to have to catch this at some point. And that's not just before, it's also during the action and it's afterwards. So I thought that critique was great. And it's a really good indication of, while you're struggling to try to maintain all these things, like you said, I would love to go and do a count of how many curves you have to keep in mind just for this assignment. It's nice to have someone who's not even almost a TA, but almost like an art director. If we're talking about the real world, you have your art director who can watch those things, so you can take care of the technicalities, and you kind of separate your brain into the 2 or 3 different kind of modes. That's the cool thing about the critique, is that it's not just, oh, here's a grade and here's what you did wrong. you can actually go back and do another pass and another pass, and the TA can kind of help guide you through all of those. Do you see a lot of people doing that in these classes where they submit something and then come back and submit again?
Yeah, we do actually. And the classes are, well, you know this, the classes are built so that there are, so many weeks of lessons, and then there's a catch up week, and then more lessons. And then at the end, there's an extended critique. So I often have students that will, if they get caught up, then they'll go back and say, okay, I'm submitting this again because I want to make this a portfolio piece, or I want to next level it so that I can use it in my demo reel. And so we get a lot of that, especially in that extended critique, where students just want to kind of do the next level and get some more notes and take it as far as they can.
You brought up a really good point. I want to, echo something that someone in the chat, I think Christine said, it's nice to have these assignments, and it's really nice to have, the chance to test this and get better. But sometimes in your demo reel, you don't want it to always look like the same assignment that everyone else has. In all of these classes for animation, is everybody supplied just with the same assets, or are you ever encouraged to design something of your own?
So it depends on the assignment. A lot of the assignments in After Effects Kickstart, you are supplied with the assets, and that's so that, the assets are designed such that you kind of have to do the key things that we want you to learn so that you can get through the assignment. But then there are also always assignments where you get to be creative and do some design. We have a couple in After Effects Kickstart where it's animating shapes to music, and you're kind of just given, use geometry, pick one of these musics and make the animation. So there's kind of room for creativity. And then maybe a little bit more in the later classes, but even if you're given the assets, if you want to redesign those visuals, as long as you're still hitting the kind of core lesson, right, and you're still doing the things that we want you to learn, that's perfectly okay. And many students do that really successfully.
If you watched yesterday, we had Gina Taylor on, and she is a young motion designer, only been in the game for about a year. And almost every final assignment in the 4 or 5 classes she's taken, she completely redid the designs, which is insane because some of the classes, there's so much to do just on the animation side to take the design. But what's amazing about it is we showed her demo reel. It's very hard to pick out like any of the common things or the common assignments that you've seen people do for the last 3 or 4 years. So it is super powerful. It's pretty amazing, but it's also a double-edged sword because you do want to learn the assignment, but you kind of also always want to have an amazing additional thing. That's where I love what you said. I'm not going to give it away, but you said the phrase extended critique. There's a hint there about something in the future for people at School of Motion, but I'll stop at that. I won't say any more. I'm getting word from our man behind the curtain, Kyle, that there actually is an assignment that allows you to do design in this class. And he has an example from Xavier, I believe. It's called Keyframe Killer. Kyle, if you can you throw that up?
Anticipate this. Easy ease yourself, fool. Animate those eyeballs straight to heaven. HTTP 1080 29.7. And here's a tool tip. Animation's got no filler. Cause I'm a keyframe killer.
This one makes me laugh every time. Let that play if you can, Kyle, so we can just talk about it. Sarah and I have had a lot of fun actually animating, doing some kinetic type for School of Motion recently. Is there anything in here that you want to point out just as a TA or just a fellow animator that you think stands out in this, but either design or animation, besides like the audio track is hilarious to animate too?
Right. It's a little bit of an earworm, so sorry for that. But yeah, what I love about this in particular is that, there's one point where it says animate those eyeballs straight to heaven. And that's an opportunity where you can use the animation to sort of reinforce the concept, right? And this is done perfectly right here. All that text kind of floats up and drags a little bit towards the top of the screen. And it's just kind of a next level way to think about it, right? You could just animate the type, but you can also think about, how can I animate the type such that it supports the message?
Yeah, no, it's such a cool thing because it does let you kind of simplify some of those things. Like it's amazing to do like a ball bounce, right? Which it already has enough things. You can make it more complicated by adding rotation or squash and stretch, but it's at least self-contained into like a ball and those sets of controls. And then you go to something like the robot assignment where it's like just this crazy amount of things. It's fun to do something like this, like kinetic type, after you've kind of like, okay, I need something easier. And you can kind of feel like you're Neo in the Matrix where you're like, oh, I leveled up by doing that really hard thing, going back to an assignment that I thought was not that big of a deal. Now you have all these new tools and these new things to push and play with. And I mean, anytime you animate type, you always think you've done everything, but you can actually animate each letter individually and you can offset each thing. And you can start thinking, like we said, about character and tone and mood, even with type, right? Like even with just simple things of like timing, spacing, posing, that applies from like the hardest to animate, like we've said a million times, like all this stuff comes from these books and these people. It all applies directly to shapes and colors and letters too.
Yeah. And again, even with type, you've got to think about that personality, right? Like, is this upbeat? Is it sad? Is it serious? Your type is a character too.
Yeah, exactly. And one last thing I want to say before we go to the next one, Javier actually took After Effects Kickstart, but before this, he was an amazing designer. He was an amazing illustrator, and we might even have a hint at it on his ArtStation page. You can see how good his illustrations are, but he definitely was not feeling as strong in his animation skills. I'm happy to report back. He told us that he actually got his first motion gig after taking AEK. So for the people out there who are like, oh man, it's going to take me forever to get into animation, no matter what your skill set is, it doesn't mean you have to take 4 of these classes for an entire year. You can bolt animation into what you already do. And look at these illustrations, look at these character designs with what you learn in even something as kind of like beginner level as AEK. You can bring these things to life, and it can be something that can add to your demo reel, to your portfolio, even just how you speak about yourself when you're trying to find a new job. So Javier, congratulations. And also these illustrations are crazy. This is so good.
So good.
So let's talk about Animation Bootcamp. Now, this is kind of like, I guess this is the OG. This is the one that started it all, right? This is the first single that Joey dropped onto the motion design world, and he had a hit right off the bat. Can you talk a little bit about this class? Because I think there's probably a lot of people, if you're watching this, you've at least heard it. You may have probably already taken it, but for someone who hasn't, what is this class all about? Because I think a lot of times when people get into animation, they're like, oh, okay, I got to go take a bunch of After Effects classes, or I got to do 10,000 drawings before I can even be good enough to make those drawings animate. What's the story behind Animation Bootcamp?
Oh, first, I just want to say it's so good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Animation Bootcamp it's the thing that will, it's beyond learning the tool, right? So you can learn how to use After Effects, but Animation Bootcamp is how to use After Effects in such a way that you're making something beautiful, right? It's smooth, or it's poppy, or it's bouncy, and it's a great class for anyone who's kind of looking at their work and thinking, why doesn't my work look like that beautiful work that I see in whatever studio's demo reel? And that's what Animation Bootcamp is about. It's how to use the tools to illustrate those principles of animation and to get all of that gooey, ooey, awesome, oozy motion.
I love it. That's a great way to describe every transition that I've ever wanted to make, but I've never had the time to do. Gooey, smooth animation. What I love about Animation Bootcamp is that it is obviously After Effects is one of the tools that drives everything, but it is not an After Effects class. That's not the first thing it does. It really is about the principles of animation, and not just like the 12 principles that we hear from Disney animation all the time. It's how you apply those to motion design, right? Like, it really gets into the like super tight detail that once you learn that principle, it sticks with you all the time. Like, talking about, like I say all the time, posing, timing, spacing, those kinds of things. But like, what it means when you hit F9, like, why does it look and feel more pleasing to the eye, and how do you use that to your advantage, and how do you avoid that? I think Joey does some great breakdowns of, and I never even remember what the other graph is in After Effects, but there's 2 ways to look at motion, right? There's your traditional curve editor that you can grab. And then I think it's the speed graph. I try to avoid using it completely, because until Animation Bootcamp, I never really understood like why you would want to use it, because I came from 3D where everything is curves. Like, it's always curves. There's never anything that's like abstracted away from that. Curves are like as close to metal as you can get. But he goes through multiple times about why and where you would want to use it, and explains it in a way that makes it much more intuitive. And everything is like that, right? Like, keyframing, working with the curve editor, working with the actual composition window, where and when you can actually manipulate the shape of your curves of the animation, and why that goes away sometimes, which is very confusing in After Effects, why you can and can't have that. Even simple things like separating dimensions. Yeah, it seems like a very weird concept until somebody shows you where it's at and how it's hidden and when you want to use it. But all of those really noodly things within After Effects that are unique to it come second, after you actually spend time learning about animation, which I think is the thing that made it really different. That was the first time anybody ever put all these things together in one place. Who do we have to take a look at a critique for Animation Bootcamp?
We have Kevin Gomes' Animation Bootcamp assignment.
I think it's Kevin, only because he's in the chat, and I'm going to hear it for the thing. I think it's Kevin Holmes. He has a secret H. Is it Gomes or Holmes? Well, you know what?
Let's call it Gomes.
Gomes. Kevin, mystery last name. You tell us in the chat, but I'm putting money on Holmes, and you're putting money on Gomes. Kevin has had.
Don't bet on me.
Kevin has taken a bunch of courses here at School Motion. He's obviously taken Animation Boot Camp, but he's also taken CAB, the Character Animation Boot Camp, which is a perfect follow-on from AB. AMM, which is that class you talked about, Advanced Motion Methods, and Expression Session, which is actually a perfect kind of in-between. Animation Boot Camp, you wouldn't think taking Expressions Session would be the right thing for an animation track, but if you take that before Advanced Motion Methods, it's amazing how much more AMM is enjoyable, for one, because there's some expression stuff in there, but also it just opens a door to like how someone like Sander van Dyke works. What are we going to look at for Kevin? Which assignment did we take a look at for this one?
So I believe we're looking at the final project for Kevin, right? And this is one of those where a lot of students will actually go in and sort of redesign, right? Take the parts and reinterpret them so that they do have a very cool looking sort of demo reel piece out of it.
Yeah, you know what? Yesterday we looked at Gina Taylor's reel, who I mentioned, and she redesigned, I think, this entire piece. So if you watch her reel, you'll see a bunch of shots that is one of the amazing things about School Motion is when people come and take it, they have this wealth of knowledge to look at what people have done in the past to compare themselves. You know, like this ice sculptor final, it's almost kind of infamous at this point because so many people have, you know, taken it and posted it. But it also shows you how you can kind of expand it. What Gina did with that and kind of redesigning it and still doing all the animation work is a pretty cool thing. Maybe we'll drop that into the chat showing her demo reel. But yeah, Ice Sculptor, this actual assignment. Have you done this assignment before, Sarah?
You know, I've done it on my own just for practice because you can't TA the class, right, if you haven't actually done all the things yourself. But I think that this assignment, the message, right, you be the ice sculptor, don't just learn the tool. That is animation boot camp, right? You're learning how to sculpt with After Effects. You're not just learning how After Effects works. And I love the assignment for the message and for how much creativity there is and how you can tell this story.
See that Joey's always gets credit for all of his puns, but his meta commentary at the same time with his assignments is it should also be applauded. I think that was the best time. Let's go ahead and run the Ice Sculptor from Kevin Holmes.
Okay, the ice sculptor assignment. This is the culmination, right? Ideally, it's a chance for you to demonstrate everything you've learned in all of Animation Bootcamp. So I am going to play this once with the sound, and then I will turn the sound down and talk about it.
What's the difference between a lumberjack and an ice sculptor? Both of them use a chainsaw, and the lumberjack probably knows more about the chainsaw, how to take it apart and clean it, and how to be really efficient with it, and chop down trees with precision. That guy is good with a chainsaw, but nobody really cares. Now, when the ice sculptor uses that chainsaw to make, say, a giant ice dragon, crowds gather, people talk about it, and nobody cares if he really knows how the chainsaw works. They don't say, that guy is good with the chainsaw. No, they say, that guy is awesome. That guy is an artist. You can use a chainsaw to chop down a tree or to make a 10-foot ice dragon. My advice? Don't be good with a chainsaw. Don't fixate on learning the tool. It makes no difference. Learn the craft. Be the ice sculptor.
Unless you can be Batman, then always be Batman.
Okay, I'm going to turn that down a little bit while we're going through the credits. Okay, first off, Kevin, this is so much fun. Not only did you take the opportunity to redesign all of the storyboards and animate your redesigned versions, but you also added this fun twist to the end, right? Like, who wants to be an ice sculptor when you could be Batman? The choice is obvious. So thank you for that. Thank you for making all of us TAs giggle a little bit when we watch this. I think that's fabulous. The design looks great, right? You've got great contrast. Obviously, you've got some design chops. I'm going to focus my notes specifically on the animation. I think overall the animation is working really well throughout this entire video. There are just a couple of spots where we could kind of sweeten things a little bit. So you've obviously sort of taken in and digested and learned all of those wonderful, easing curves. Like, we've got some snappy motion here that's working really well. I might slow that snappy motion down just a little bit on some of those pop-ons, but that's probably just my own personal sort of style opinion. So feel free to ignore that note. Where I do think some improvements can be made are When this screen with all this stuff comes on, we're going to see it in just a second. All this stuff kind of comes on. If we frame by frame through it, we can see that it's all kind of just coming on. Just kind of, it doesn't have any special easing to it, right? I like that things are staggered. I think that you can really play up that sort of difference in how things come on by adding maybe some more extreme easing to this, you know, really sort of maybe popping things on and then sort of slowing them down as they settle into place. You might also do kind of a wave across the screen, right? Instead of having everything appear at once, kind of stagger that out, you know, maybe from one side to the other, and maybe that those layers stagger in an ease curve, right? So they kind of flow along the curve of an ease, and that could be really fun. I'm being super nitpicky here. I think this is, you know, all the details are animated, which is fantastic. I mean, this is a lot of work, right? You've animated every single little bit and piece of this, and I think it's working really well. That's just how you can next level it, should you choose to do so. Great stuff with those sparkle kind of accents on the chainsaw. Let's see those one more time. Oh, here it comes. Bling, bling, bling. I think you might be able to slow those sparkles down a little bit, right? Like they come on and they go so fast. Or maybe it's not a matter of slowing them down, but staggering them a little more. So we get a little bit more of that, just a little more chance to appreciate all that bling. This is really fun. I think you might even be able to... Let's see that chainsaw go through that tree one more time. I love how it slows down. You might be able to kind of speed that up at the end, right? So it kind of starts fast and then slows down like when it hits the resistance of that tree. I think you might be able to pick up that speed at the end a little bit more. And then when we get to this log bounce, I love that you took the time to do that bounce. I think that can be a little bit more smooth, right? It just looks like it's not quite following that ideal kind of bounce curve, and then the path's not quite as good as it could be, right? So it kind of comes up, and I almost want to see that path cleaned up a little bit so that it's a full arc instead of feeling like it arcs up and then drops down. So I would take another look at that path and also that easing, making sure that we've got, you know, again, that with those bounces, you want to have that hard in and out of the ground, and you want to have that nice, smooth kind of slow down through the top, a little bit more hang time there. And I think carrying that through to the follow through, I think that will be fun as well. Again, all this text is animated, the underlines, we've got all the details going on here. Right here, we've got a little bit more static time on this frame than necessary. So I think an easy solution to that is just to stagger these 3 chainsaws a little bit more and have the first one start sooner. So instead of having the screen come up and be sort of just static for a while, have that first chainsaw start right away and then just spread them out a little more. You'll still get all 3 chainsaws. It'll just spread out and keep the screen alive a little bit more. The same would go for this next screen, right? We're kind of holding for just a little too long. The sparkles are fun. It might be cool to also have some kind of maybe just a slow pan or maybe a slow kind of zoom, right? Like maybe we're just getting a little bit closer to this dragon or a little farther away, slowly through the shot, right? Or you can have a slow parallax, like maybe this is just moving ever so slightly to the left with that middle ground moving ever so much more slowly the same direction, and that way we get just a little bit of movement to keep that screen alive. This is really fun. I'm just going to pause on this for a second. Let's go back to that to appreciate the fun jokes here. Sculpey McSculpt face. Ice to meet you. Like these are great, right? These kind of details just make my heart sing. You didn't have to put that much effort into this or that much thought into it, but you did. And that just shows me and everyone who watches this how much you care about this animation. Plus, these are really good puns. I totally appreciate them. Okay, moving on. Again, like I said, all of this is really solid. These are just sort of little details that you can focus on if you ever decide to go back and next level some of this stuff. There's one more spot that I just want to talk about, and we'll get to it in a second here. Again, on that dragon, you can slow those sparkles a little bit. These guys here. Okay, so this is another spot where you can, again, just go back and review. You know, there was that whole kind of detailed lesson on bouncing. And these guys can all have, I think, just a little more hang time at the top, right? Just flatten out that curve at the top, really stretch those Bezier handles out so that they just feel a little more floaty, right? Especially that chainsaw. But yeah, I think all three of them. And then that last one, the icon, I do like how it kind of overshoots a little and then goes back into place. I think you might just slow that whole thing down, right? Really kind of keeping with that top of a bounce, like smooth, slow easing, really kind of ease it in and slowly back. And I think you might even connect those moves where you're easing in. Let's pause on this. So you might even connect that where you're going up and slowly going into that follow through. And then maybe that follow through bounce back into place becomes the anticipation for that move to the right. So instead of having kind of an up, let me just frame by frame with the key. Instead of having an up and pause and settle, and then an anticipation right away and a move off, kind of connect that. Say you have an up, an up to overshoot to back to anticipation to off. And then that makes it one kind of fun, bouncy move, right? And the AE logo sort of becomes the hero of the shot, revealing the next thing and sort of the catalyst for all of this stuff to come. So those are all of my nitpicky notes. Again, I love this Batman. I love that you gave credit to Joey and to your TA and to, basically everyone who needed it. I think this is fabulous. And I think that the extra time and creativity you put into it really makes this something special for your portfolio. So awesome job on this one.
Amazing work, Kevin. And I've got word in from our producer. It is Kevin Holmes, not Gomes. He says it's Homes, but it's spelled Gomes. So awesome, Kevin. We want to make sure he's in the chat. He's making sure we're keeping him honest. That was amazing. That the thing about that thing that I really, really loved about it was that it's a story, right? Like you're not just animating just like a little bit of a performance. It's a full-on story. But the things I noted on that, on top of what you're critiquing, was there's tight transitions, right? Like those things that everybody always asks, like, how do I do buck style transitions, right? And sometimes they don't have to be these super overproduced, actually attention, like they steal the attention from the messaging in the story. What I liked about them is that they're very clean. They're very tight. They don't take too long, but they also weren't repetitive, which I really, really loved. Like sometimes you find a nice transition that you do, and then you just repeat it over and over. You don't change the positions where they start. You don't change where they end. You don't change on them. It's not repetitive at all, which is really cool. Another thing that you mentioned in there too, that I just want to reaffirm, is that he has really good like eye direction and audience focus. Like everything wasn't just centered on the screen. He was letting the center of attention be sometimes on the left third, sometimes on the right third, but it doesn't, like bounce around so much that it's like distracting as well. Like there's a really like a focus on like the audience is watching it, not just like, hey, these are cool animations for cool animation's sake, which is hard to like have the restraint to do that when you're starting to get better at animating. By the time you get this, you want to show off, right? Like you really want to like go crazy, but sometimes you want to be restrained. And then the other thing that I think goes with animators as they learn is sometimes if you're working on a longer project like this, while you're working on the project, you have a discovery. You're like, oh, that's how I make that move. And then the animation itself is not consistent in like timing and spacing, right? Like sometimes you'll have stuff start off poppy and they're like, oh, I figured out how to overshoot and have something come back in and settle where it really feels clean. But then you don't go back and fix that earlier on. He really does a really amazing job. So yeah, it's pretty cool. This is a really, really good piece. It's one of those things that we see so many of them that we can get so nitpicky. I loved how deep you went in on the notes, because sometimes you feel like you post it and here's people are just saying, yep, good. That's good. But it's more than just that, right? You want to know why it's good. You want to know where you can actually make something even pushed a little bit better. So that was a really, really great example of how in depth for a final project, a critique can actually go. That was about, I think, 10 minutes. And there were so many things that kind of came out of it. So that's amazing. Anything else you want to say about Kevin before we move on to advanced motion methods?
I think that Kevin's project is fabulous, and it's actually a great transition to start talking about advanced motion methods, because you mentioned how he's kind of leading the eye around the screen, and those transitions are not always happening the same way. They're going this direction and then this direction and that direction. And that's one of the things that Sonder explores in advanced motion methods, is how you can sort of it's almost like a motion script, right, for the
Mhm.
entire piece and how you get into that stuff. So that's a great segue.
Oh, well, we're getting ready to talk about that. How about we just throw up Kevin's site too, just so you can see, so everybody can have a chance to take a look at it. If we can throw it up in the chat and pull it up here, because it is actually kind of like a great celebration of a lot of the different animation assignments. Like this is almost like the greatest hits of what you can do inside the animation classes at School of Motion. One of my very personal friends or personal favorites is Axel Dangerson. It's a character that's at the very end of one of our classes that like you don't see it as often as some of these other ones, but it's a really cool character that you get to animate. And then I think that top middle one, that looks reminiscent of something I've seen in AMM, correct?
Yep, that's an AMM class. That's actually one where you get that at the beginning of Advanced Motion Methods, and they just Sonder just kind of throws it at you and says, what are you going to do with this? And then you revisit it at the end of Advanced Motion Methods after you have a much better handle on, okay, here's all the things I can do with this.
Yeah. That's one of those things that some of our courses I think do a really great trick, that you start struggling and then at the end you really can see how far you've pushed yourself. We have a couple questions before we go to AMM that came in from the chat. Vivek says, what is market value in terms of price and clients' attractions for this kind of animation? I think he was referencing the Ice Sculptor Explainer. Do you have any insight into that, Sarah, in terms of like, what do people want stuff like this, or is it just a good exercise? Like, is there value in learning a project like this?
Yeah, there's so much work like this out there, right? Like that's an explainer video, and so much of the work in motion design is explainer videos, whether it's for a commercial or a website or social. Like there's a lot of it. As far as price points, you'll have every price point. You can have a low priced and very, very high priced, and it just depends on who your client is.
Yeah, that's so important to say. That I think sometimes people hear the word explainer and they kind of almost roll their eyes or think like, oh gosh, but I know there are multiple times for multiple companies that we would get clients who want something that's not any further developed than just this, right? Like not more elaborate character designs or longer even than this piece. And they wanted like 4 or 5 of them, and it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, we were shocked. We're like, do you know what you're asking for? But it still has, especially when it's you forget a lot of times clients aren't just making stuff for outside, like for customers. A lot of times they're making work for their employees inside, and it's almost even more valuable to a company to have a beautifully produced, well scripted, well timed out explainer video for their employees to understand a new feature or a new philosophy or a new principle within the company. So don't discredit this explainer videos, that there's still a lot of value and still a lot of potential in learning how to do that work. Then also, we have a question from Erica Dillon saying, watching this makes me want to redo my final project. I animated mine as fast as I could, which I think is a common thing with a lot of people in School of Motion courses, that, there's so much to do. And by the time you get to the end, you're a little tired and you want to get that critique, you want to get that feedback, but at the same time, like you got to get it in, you got to get it done. How do you feel about that? I see you smiling. It feels like
I mean, why not, right? Like I've seen a lot of students who, after they finish the class, will go back and redesign something or reskin it, just to kind of add their own visuals to it, and take that final pass on the animation, right? Like it's the hard part is finding the time and the motivation to do it without the sort of peer group of the class and your TA sort of waiting on your assignment. But if you can do it, if you can find a way to get that motivation for yourself, it's a great way to make awesome portfolio pieces, because now you've got all the knowledge and hopefully a little time to sleep on it. And then you can go back in and really dial it.
Yeah, and that is actually one of the nice things about the Square that we've launched recently for School of Motion, is that we do have an area where people can, at any time, sometimes people submit stuff like months after a class is done, and the students are still there. A lot of us are hanging out in there, and it's not an official TA critique, but there are definitely lots of times when people will submit something and get feedback months later. So it's definitely worth it. It's definitely something that if you want to revisit it afterwards, or after you've taken another class or two, sometimes that'll happen. You take animation boot camp, you take expression sessions, AMM, and then you come back and you're like, oh man, I think I could blow that thing away. So redoing it from scratch also is worthwhile as well.
Oh yeah, definitely worthwhile.
All right. I have a note here. It's flashing in yellow. It says to say Kevin's name with a G before we move on, smiley face. And it says G Ohms, just rhymes with home. So I want to make sure we got that in one more time. It's the great mystery of.
Just gonna say, I think I won this one. I think I won this one.
I think it's. I think we'll call it a tie. with you leading. You have a leading edge on the tie. But Kevin, thank you so much for sharing that and giving people a lot of insight into what that final assignment is for Animation Bootcamp. But let's talk AMM. This one is like the 500-pound gorilla. This is the one that like so many people talk about that they can't wait to take. But at the same time, a lot of people talk about being very scared about taking this one as well, or at least intimidated because they've heard things about it. Can we either verify those fears or kind of dispel some of those myths with advanced motion methods?
I have to say, I signed up for advanced motion methods the first time it ran. As soon as it came out, I could not wait to take it, and it kicked my butt. I mean, it is everything that you hear, right? Sander's an incredible teacher. He's an incredible animator, and he shares like some of that secret sauce with you.
Mm-hmm.
The assignments are intense, right? Like you saw that one in Kevin's portfolio. It's a million different little pieces. And on top of all that, you're learning about, how to have a hero in a bunch of shapes and how to kind of script your movement, right? Your movement itself becomes a script and tells a story. Just in the direction that it goes and how that works through the whole piece, not just each part of the piece. So it's all those things and more. It's an incredible class. I'm always a little partial to expression session because I'm a code nerd, but I would have to say like I probably got my work leveled up so much in advanced motion methods. So I'd have to say it's probably the class that made the biggest difference for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's those two pair so well together that you don't have to take one or the other, but being able to just be comfortable, like feeling comfortable with expressions is something anybody who's spending their days in After Effects will benefit from. Even if you're not writing your own code, but just knowing what other people are using to be able to stitch things together, which is I think a lot what ends up happening in AMM is that they're not like so complicated that you can't understand it. But if you have a little bit of like context, it helps a ton. So we're going to talk about Katrina Suhu's I think it was the Museum Milano piece. And this critique is really cool because it really shows the power of being able to submit something, get some feedback, and then continue down the path. It's that whole idea I think we said before about you can do 10,000 drawings and eventually get better at drawing, but you can reduce that down to like 1,000 drawings with the right people looking at your work at the right time. And I think that that's what's really interesting about this. Let's take a look at the beginning. I think the animatic phase from Katrina, and then we'll move on to see how she took your feedback and then could polish it afterwards.
Katrina, okay, let's take a look at your Advanced Motion Methods Museum Milano animatic. So the idea here is to take something that is relatively minimalist and then applying Sander's 5 different approaches to animation to create an animatic that you will later refine. So let's take a look. I'm going to play this once with the sound and then I'll turn the sound down and we can talk about it.
An asymmetrical division is needed in order to create the dynamics necessary for progression and extension from unity. The shape of things. Isabella Conticello at Museum Milano.
Okay, a lot of cool stuff going on here. Now, what I'm looking for in this critique and what your TA is looking for in the homework locker are, again, those sort of elements that Sander had pointed out for how to make sure that your motion is motivated, right? So you want to make sure that you have a clear motivation for each move that's happening, some structure to your concept. You want to have that red thread that he calls it, right? Or that hero element. You want to have, again, balance between those elements and geometry, which of course is sort of built into these storyboards, right? There's no way to animate this stuff without having some geometry in there. So what I love about this is that you do have a clear motivation and you're letting the geometry actually motivate the moves, right? So we just saw that swoop come around and that line creates the spin. And then that spin sort of zooms in, let's go back to it just for a second. Okay, so we have this line, it's coming in. It's creating that spin, and once that spins, it builds up and moves to the right, lower right. I think we could have a little bit more motivation, right, for that move to the lower right, because we have the spins very clearly motivated. I'm not convinced that there's as clear of a motivation for this move to the right, other than you need to get it there, right? Because so you can do this clearly motivated extension. So I might try to think of a way to anticipate that move or maybe build in some sort of animation motivation, right? If you just have that square somehow anticipate that move to the lower right, I think that'll make it feel a little bit better. But then you've got extension that kind of goes along with the voiceover. So I think this is all working really well. I can definitely see how you intend to kind of refine it. There's definitely some room for that. But again, this is just an animatic. So as far as those elements go, we clearly have it, right? Those lines are sort of the heroes. That purple color is kind of taking over as sort of what's guiding us through this. I would just be a little bit more consistent with that in your next version. But overall, I think this is a really solid start. And I look forward to checking out the next version, which we will do in just a moment.
And I love this assignment. It's one of the early ones in AMM, and it's really interesting because you do have, if I remember correctly, a bunch of different options for what artwork you can actually work with. But this one is so motivated by the design. And I think the tip that you gave that it makes me smile every time I see it is that you're still really focusing on going back to the fundamentals, even at this like very advanced level class. That tip about anticipation, when you're trying to lead the eye with a shape and that shape disappears, right? Like your eye is waiting, where am I supposed to go? And if it stops and then goes in a completely other direction, it's almost a speed bump for the viewer, right? It's almost like whoa, that something broke in an otherwise like really smooth, really slick piece. It kind of is like, wait, it's jarring. That tip about just like anticipating back before you go, it really is the thing that kind of like helps the eye along when you're making a major direction change.
Yeah, and I think that this assignment, you're right, there are different artworks to choose from, but they're all very minimal, right? Mm-hmm. So there's just a few shapes, and you're really, as the animator, it's up to you to kind of create that journey or create that wave of smooth awesomeness that kind of brings the viewer in. And there are so many different ways to do that, right? If you look at that artwork, it's some lines, some triangles, some squares, some shapes. I mean, there's not a clear direction given to you. So you really have to bring that yourself to the table.
Yeah, it's exciting. So when Katrina like drops this into the homework locker, she gets this feedback in what? How long is it? How is it, like in the next day or 2 days that she would see something like this?
Yeah, typically within 24 hours. Sometimes it can be 48, just if your TA is in a different time zone, or a very different time zone. But usually it's within 24 hours. I mean, I know I check the locker every day and critique everything that's in there, and every weekday. At any rate, if you submit something on a Friday night, you might not get feedback until Monday morning. But
sometimes it's a very, very dedicated or bored TAs working over the weekends. What I love about this is that it's still in your brain then, right? Like it's one thing to like make something and understand like maybe this isn't working or I need help on where to push it. But if you have to wait a whole week, like I know when I'm working, there's been more enough times where I make something, I submit it, and I don't hear anything back for weeks sometimes, whether it's from a client or from a creative director. And it's hard to get back into that, like, wait, what was I even doing? Like, I don't even know how this feedback even matches with like my intent. So within 24 hours, 40 hours, that's great. So Katrina then took this and then she moved forward to polish this, right? She's taking your feedback and then theoretically going to go and animate it. How would you approach this if you were an artist? If you heard that feedback, would you just totally like just do the tips to exactly as somebody said, or would you kind of like add that to like extending now that you've had this open up? Would you like unravel a piece knowing like, oh, I didn't think about anticipation? Like, have you seen students completely restart, or do they just take that note and just follow the note by itself?
Well, I think that's right. You're kind of getting into what separates the beginning animator from the advanced motion methods animator, right? So the feedback, the note, you can't just do the notes and leave it at that, right? You got to like take those notes and how they might apply to the rest of your piece, or how you can take that note and then think a little bit more critically about that thing. And then, really just kind of next level the storytelling and that hero element that Sandra is really big on.
Well, let's take a look at what Katrina put together. And then after that, I think we're going to pull Katrina on and we can talk to her about her whole thought process through this piece.
Okay, now taking a look at this finished version, right? You've had time to sort of review that animatic, get some feedback on it, take that feedback and make improvements that you wanted to make, as well as adding in those finishing touches, right? Really kind of finessing that timing, right? Your timing should have been pretty set after the last one, but now you can finesse it and really sort of get that easing, nice and gooey, smoothie, all those good little details. So I'm going to play this again once with the sound, and then we'll talk about it.
An asymmetrical division is needed in order to create the dynamics necessary for progression and extension from unity. The The Shape of Things from Isabella Conticello at Museum Milano.
Okay, lots of really great details are happening here. I love how you took that line that was the hero, that purple to hero element, and broke it up with some detail, right? Like we start not with a solid line, but we start with a dashed line character that's kind of swooping across. That dashed line then creates those dots that then fill the square. I think that's a beautiful way to sort of detail that while keeping all of that same basic idea going. I think this is a beautifully finished piece. I think that the easing is nice and smooth. The moves feel motivated and connected. The one thing that I think could be just sort of next leveled a little bit is right here. So everything is, again, like I said, really nicely motivated and feels like it fits together, right? Like that swoop clearly causes the rotation of the square. Then when we get to right here, let's even pause and sort of frame by frame this. So the square is kind of moving up and to the right and then back to the left for this extension. This extension is great. I love all this detail here. I don't know that you need to have that move to the right. So you could go from here straight to, straight down. I think it's going to feel a little cleaner. Right now, it feels like it's just an extra move. It doesn't feel like we need it. There's nothing about what's happening as the square fills in with triangles. Nothing in that is telling me this needs to move to the right. I don't see the sort of need for it. I think it could just as easily move straight from here to right here where it goes off. So, where we start this line coming out, you could have it come straight down or even have it come straight down and to the left a little bit, because that left diagonal move can sort of motivate that line coming out. And then you go into all the beautiful stuff that you have here. And then again, great details at the end, right? The way that text is coming on in a slightly different color on the top and then sort of changing over to the black coming out, not all at once, but kind of masking across. I think that's working really well. So a lot of really good stuff here. Great consistency. We clearly have a very nicely finished piece. Again, I would just consider that one little section where you're moving right and then left and see if you can simplify that. But overall, Katrina, this is a beautiful piece. It's going to look awesome in your portfolio, and I'm so happy to be privileged to critique it today.
Whew. That what's so fun about that is, like, I thought when I watched your critique before that, and you see the next one, the result after that, I thought it was just going to be cleanup. I thought it was just gonna be like, okay, I got to do some corrections. I'll add a little antic back when it stops, but like it's almost a totally different piece in terms of like the level of like polish and like adornment on top of it. Like that movement where you have all the little dashes coming off and then it swirls around, like the spacing on that is so nice. It's not even, it's like it whips really fast and cushions. But then when that circle transition comes in, that's like one of those moments where if you're watching a reel, you lean forward, right? You're always looking for lean forward moments. You're like, okay, I've seen this done a minute. Wait a second. What was that? Rewind. And it fires off, like, even if you're a creative director who hasn't animated in a while, you're still like, I want to know how you did that. Like, how did you actually pull that off? So maybe because we have the chance, let's bring Katrina in and actually ask her, where did you get the idea for these circles and how in the world did you pull that off? Because that was so much of that polish was not in that initial phase. What was that like working on that project and taking it to that next level?
Sure. Well, in the class, there's a lot of focus on really like the different phases of animation. And so, for the animatic, it was really trying to focus on the basic idea for movement and trying not to get too caught up in all those details. I mean, I think as you just work on things, you just come up with ideas. Sometimes they're accidental and they just work out. So it's just being open to things that happen and going from there.
How hard was this assignment for you in terms of like approaching it? Like you get the assignment, you get the artwork, and then you have to come up with something that lets you do all these cool things. Like what was your ideation phase? Like how did you come up with where and how to move everything?
This was so hard. I mean, like you said, it was one of the earliest assignments. And basically you just get that one design frame to start with. You get the voiceover and the music. So you have an idea of like the tone. Mm-hmm. But because you just have one design frame to go off, it's really kind of a design assignment as well, like rolled into it. And in the lesson before the assignment, Sander goes through a different but similar art piece. And, like it was just really cool to see him work. And he took such a very simple concept to start with. And you see how he turns that into something just so sophisticated and elegant. And so I really wanted to try and focus on just seeing like what sort of simple movement could come through the geometry, through the words in the voiceover, and trying not to add too many like additional elements going in out of frame. I mean, that's also an approach you can take, but yeah, I just saw how he was able to take something so simple and elevate it, and I wanted to try and do the same thing.
I mean, I think that's what was so cool about seeing these in two phases, that you did just that, right? Like it's the temptation is once you have the animation working, it's to go overboard by just like plussing it. But all the elements you added were supportive of the main thought, the things that were there in the initial pass, like even having multiple strokes going around something, but of thinner values, like as it goes around, or those dotted lines, they're not taken away from the movement that you established at the beginning. Can we rewind a little bit and just talk about you and like where you came from and how you landed at, School of Motion, and what about motion design kind of got you interested in it? You have a very, very different, very interesting background from most motion designers that I've met.
Sure. Well, in college, I was a piano performance major, and I even started a graduate program in piano, but I quit after a semester, and I had to sort of like figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I found some like graphic design courses at a local city college. I thought I'd give that a try, and then found out I could get an associate's program in graphic design. So I went to New York for that. And then the last semester, I think I had one more digital design requirement that I needed. And it was either like web design or motion graphics. I didn't know anything about motion graphics. And I was like, well, I'm never going to learn this on my own. So might as well have fun and take it. And it was so much fun. Like I loved it immediately. And of course I wasn't going to like pay more for school to like take more courses. I mean, somehow I was able to get an internship at Gretel, which was awesome. And then I just started freelancing a little, freelancing at Nickelodeon, started like permalancing, and then like eventually got a staff position. So I guess I graduated from design school in 2011. And then in 2018, I moved to LA and I started freelancing here.
That's amazing. I mean, it's always fun to hear about a motion designer's background, from the perspective of looking where they're at now, where a lot of people think like, oh my gosh, you're at the top of the food chain, you're at the top of the like goals where you want to get, but here all those steps along the way. Can you just talk a little bit more about Nickelodeon? Because I feel like that's such a different space than most motion designers even get a chance to like work with. And how did you get there, and what were you working on? What was your day-to-day like at Nickelodeon? It's
funny. I've gotten a bunch of jobs through Motionographer, well, at least jobs that then led to other jobs because of people who I met there. It's actually funny. I saw a post for Nickelodeon on Motionographer. I emailed, and then I didn't I actually the art director had emailed me back, but I didn't see the email for 2 weeks because it went into my spam folder.
Yeah.
And so finally one day it was like. I just decided randomly to go through my spam folder. I don't know why. And I saw the email. I was like, oh my God. So I emailed her back. Luckily, she still needed someone. So I came in, and, I have to say it was a really good experience working there, because I think as I was so green when I started, I really only had like that one class and a little bit of, internship, whatever. But I think working sort of long-term at a place with other people who, get to know you and get to help guide you, like that really helped me a lot, in terms of how, work processes are and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's such an interesting spot at the time where you're at in your career too, because just like finding motion design at your like second to last moment in school, it kind of seems like it opened up where you could go. I feel like being at a place like Gretel or a place like Nickelodeon, just like creates way more opportunities, right? Like there's just doors you would never have thought to look at, that if you have relationships with people, it's kind of a lot like being at School of Motion, right? Like if you haven't met all these people in your class, you may not have those relationships that then can also open doors. I think it's a really big parallel. Would it be cool if we showed your demo reel? I think there's some really interesting things there that people would enjoy seeing.
Yeah,
play it? I'd love to play it. Yeah, let's see it. I want to see and hear it. Oh man, if we can, let's just loop this in the background while we talk, because I think there's so much stuff I want to talk about. Sarah, what's your impression when you see this the first time?
The thing I love about this reel is I can see your personality, Katrina.
Hmm.
Like it's right there. I feel like I know who you are by seeing this reel. At least I
Hmm.
know who you are in terms of what you would be like to work with and how much fun you have animating.
Yeah, what I love about this, and this is again coming from someone who made a class about demo reels, has watched more than I feel like I've seen everything you can see 10 times over. Something that doesn't happen very often in demo reels is that there's literally a call to action threaded throughout the entire thing, right? Like most demo reels are just like, here's my name, please watch my stuff, and then here's my phone number. But like there's so much in here where it's literally like threaded in so nicely that even some of the stuff in here that, you know, like, I love that your friendly neighborhood designer and animator happening in the middle of the reel. It's letting people remember them. This shot with two people laughing, it just all plays into this feeling of like, yes, I can see what you can do, but like Sarah said, I really get a sense of like, man, I just want to get on the phone with this person because they feel fun. It feels exciting. They feel playful. And even just saying something like that, that is such a simple little thing, but a really nicely designed shot that also says, let's work together. You have no idea how much of a breath of fresh air that is for somebody who's watched like tens of thousands of demo reels where you're like, hey, I understand that we're going to be partnering. I don't want to work for you. I don't think I'm like the best person in the world that's going to blow everything away. I want to work together. Like just that simple little statement just means so much to someone watching it. This reel is great. How hard was it to put this reel together, Katrina?
Well, I made it sort of during demo reel dash, which I took with you, and that's where I got the idea to put title cards like in the middle of it as well. I had a lot of fun with the title cards.
Mhm.
Like I don't know if you get this, but like when you're working on your reel and you're looking at all your stuff, and you start to get the imposter syndrome, like, oh,
Yeah.
is this all I have? Like, I don't know if I love all of this stuff anymore. So I was
Yeah.
like, well, if I really put in the effort to making a few title cards, like more than just like the beginning, ending, more than something super simple, like that can
Mhm.
sort of count as like another piece and maybe like
Totally
help
does.
to elevate everything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are all ideas that I came up with from your course, which was super helpful. So,
Well, I mean, what I love about it too is that, like, I think a lot of times once you've graduated and you're out in the world and you're just, you're working, you're looking to level up, you're looking to get to the next place, you don't give yourself a lot of time to just make work for yourself, right? Like we say personal projects, but a lot of times those personal projects are still geared towards like, I got to learn this technique or I got to make this thing that looks like this because I want to work at this place. But very rarely you just like get to have fun for fun's sake. And I feel like that's what title cards, instead of them being a burden, like I feel like even in Demo Real Dash, when it gets to title time, there's always people who are like, oh, I'm just gonna put some type on black, like white type on black, because they're like, I'm exhausted. I don't want to, but they can really be looked and viewed on as like, this is a moment to just have joy, to have fun and express, just the stuff you dig. Like it's can be, it doesn't have to be a burden. I think it's threaded the storyline you tell. It feels like a commercial for you and much less like a just like, here's my website in pictures. Like it has so much more of like a personality. So I think that's great. I think we might even also have your portfolio. I'd love to put it on there because Katrina, like you obviously have really great animation chops, but you're also a really, really talented designer. And on top of that, I really get the sense that like your music background comes through in your work. And we've seen that without trying to. That's kind of been a thread through all three of these showcases to some degree, is that people who have a training in music, like their animation just feels different at a very early stage in learning animation. Can you talk at all about just like how your music background or your music training or just your affinity for music, like has that played had a role to play in your career so far?
I mean, I guess I'm really in tune to just sort of like timing and pacing. Like I always try and pay attention to, where the pauses are and how, how they can affect the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
Also just like, I guess sometimes like with music, there's a lot of layering and there's like, it's similar to how there's layering in animation too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I mean, I feel like when you were even just talking about that first piece about like talking about Saunders and kind of like instruction about like wanting to make something feel sophisticated and elegant. A lot of your work has that. Like there's just a sense of like rhythm. There's a sense of just like a core story with just enough little detail without distracting from it. Even this animation itself, like the timing and spaciness, that pause as it comes up and kind of holds, but you have all the kind of like secondary action of like the flames whipping up in the tail. I without even knowing you personally from looking at the work, I would guess that you have some type of like music training or music background because it feels very lyrical when you watch stuff, right? It doesn't feel like anything's busy for busy's sake. It feels like everything's just kind of accentuating. You know, like when you hear a good song, you can hear like the bass line or the drum line, and that drives it. And then there's all the other stuff that kind of complements it. But I feel like a lot of your animation has that same kind of sensibility to it.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice to hear.
Sarah, do you have any questions at all for Katrina? I know you've taken a ton of classes. I feel like at this point, it's almost easier to ask you, which classes have you not taken? Because there's a very long list here. I won't go through all of them, but there's a really big list. Do you have any questions for Katrina about other classes she may have taken or anything else you might have found out from AMM?
I would like to know what your favorite classes that you've taken.
Yeah.
Expression session was really fun and it was super useful. Like I mean, all School of Motion courses that I've taken like have been super useful and I've been able to like utilize them right away. But like it just helped me to learn how to like rig things up so that I could make these complicated looking animations that I could easily like adjust if I got like a note back from an art director. You know, like if I hadn't learned these things, it would have been like a headache to, you know, it takes so much longer than to just like update the code a little, like with a different number and, oh, everything's slowed down a little bit or, you know, whatever. I mean, it just, I don't know, it was definitely a game changer. And Cinema 4D was also so fun. So I had taken animation boot camp back in 2015, and I realized like how time consuming and how just how much work it was. And I didn't actually finish like on time because of that. So I waited a few years before taking my next School of Motion class because like I want to like get the most out of it. And cinema was like, you know, I hadn't taken any 3D. I didn't really learn any 3D before that. And I had so much fun, like, especially like the final project, like I really like threw myself into it like the entire 3 weeks. It was like the only thing I focused on in my life. And yeah, I mean, EJ is a great instructor and it was great.
How are you finding adding like cinema or 3D into kind of like your day-to-day as a freelancer? Is it something that you're starting to try to like specifically kind of add into pieces, or are you just waiting for when you get called for it to know that you have it in your background? Because I think that's something, you know, there's a typical kind of like path for a lot of people. They get into graphic design or editing or something like that, and they discover, like you did, motion design. For a lot of people, that means After Effects, and you know, like that's already two big things, right? To have design and animation. I think a lot of people get scared of adding 3D to their skill set. But how are you finding that now that you've taken that class? Is it something you reach for, or are you trying to learn more about it?
I'm trying to find ways to sort of like incorporate it into my 2D work, you know, like the 2D looking 3D stuff. I think that's more, you know, the style that I enjoy doing. So I haven't been able to focus too much on it recently, but I definitely need to go back and review the lessons because, you know, they're so helpful.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about having EJ teaching CG or 3D, because he has an affinity for cartoony and 2D stuff. And it's almost like he teaches you how to hook up like the bicycle pump to your drawings and just inflate your drawings into 3D in some ways, like stylistically. But I also think it's becoming a more, I hate to say trend, but more of like an in-demand skill set, is to be able to do like design influenced or 2D stylized things in 3D, not necessarily just the like super photoreal or super stylized, like high realism stuff. So that's really cool. I was going to ask you this because I feel like with your career path and with the classes you've taken and how much you've, you know, pushed on education, what's your biggest piece of advice for someone who's just curious about motion design? If you could put yourself back in that, like, all right, do I do motion design or I can't remember what the other thing was you said. You had a fork in the road and you could have picked two things. If somebody's trying to think about getting into motion design, what would be your biggest piece of advice for someone at that crossroads right now?
I mean, I think if you really enjoy it, then you just, you know, keep practicing it. And, you know, definitely School of Motion has been so helpful to me. Like, I can't stress that enough. Like, I feel like I tell any motion designer who I actually meet who like ask about it, I only have positive things to say. But yeah, I mean, just keep working on it. The motion design community in general is just so warm and so helpful. And I feel like, you know, it's a good industry to be in.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experience.
So I feel like you're a good person to ask that too, in terms of advice. You've seen so many different things and you've touched so many different classes, and you've had a really unique perspective of being able to TA so many classes and see what people's experiences are. What same question for you in terms of like, if you're at the crossroads and you're like, somebody introduced me to motion design, or I've wondered how people do stuff. What advice would you give to someone who might be watching now about, like getting in? Like, do I specialize? Do I generalize? Do I learn a tool? What would your advice be?
What I love about Katrina's story is that you described almost, you took the class on a lark and then you fell in love, right? And for me, that's what it was with motion design. I fell in love with it, but I've been doing it a long time, and I've done 3D and I've done 2D and then to characters and back to 2D. And I would just say, follow your heart. If you love what you're doing in After Effects, do as much of it as you can do. And if next year you're in love with Cinema 4D, do that too, right? Like, just follow your heart, learn all the things. And then all of these things become basically tools, right? Like, expressions are your Swiss Army knife for After Effects. Cinema 4D can also be a Swiss Army knife for After Effects. Something you can do in cinema and then render to look 2D can be a really fast way to get complexity in your 2D, or vice versa. You can use After Effects and bring that into 3D. So I just say, do what you love and do as much of it as possible and learn as many things as you can, because that thing that you're thinking about learning might be your next love.
Yep. Yeah. It might be the thing that you spend the rest of your life chasing, waking up every day and doing. One thing I love, I would just want to talk about AMM a little bit more, that I think Sandra gets really philosophical in that class from the outset, right? Like, you would imagine at the beginning, if you watch the trailer for the class or hear from people who've gone through it, you'd think like, oh man, I am going to be slinging keys and writing up expressions. And like, what I really love about even those first two lessons is it's him standing on his roof reading books about the beauty of mathematics and like these things that you wouldn't expect if you didn't know Sander. But what I love, he talks about a lot, both in the way you approach your work and then the actual work itself, is he talks a lot about flow, finding flow in how you approach sitting down and working, and how you think before you sit down, and how that kind of works through your body into the keyframes, right? Like, you're trying to find these beautiful moments of just swooping motion that flows the viewer through the piece, right? I feel like I see a lot of that in your work, Katrina, like that little bit of fire that we showed, even the Milano piece, that we saw, you added that kind of motion rather than when Sarah first mentioned it should come down and then have an anticipation. I thought I was going to see it comes to a stop and then it sits there and then it pulls back and then just rockets forward. But instead you went with this way where there's this circular motion. There's always flow. Is that something that really seeped into your kind of animating brain after having taken the class with Sandra? Because I haven't heard a lot of people talk about that as something to be thinking about when you're sitting in After Effects.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the points that he was stressing, is just always having a motivation for movement, having a reason for everything. So yeah, just having the flow makes sense and have a reason.
Yeah. Let's see what other questions we have from the chat. This is a really good time too. If you want to ask Katrina any questions specifically, we've got a few minutes with her. I saw Christine Grove. I think I talked a little bit about her question where she said, do you get, a chance to make your own designs? But her question was after that, she said, will we be able to use some of our work to showcase in our portfolio or demo reel? And I have some very strong opinions about that. I think I say them in demo reel dash, so I'll hold off until I hear from you all. But Katrina and Sarah, what do you think about taking assignments and putting them into your demo reel?
I've sort of gotten to the point where I feel like I don't want to keep School of Motion work in there unless it's something for illustration or illustration for motion or for Cinema 4D, you're actually creating your own assets. And so, you can make something that looks different from everyone else's. I mean, earlier in my career, I definitely would include School of Motion work if it, just showed my abilities and what I was able to do. Yeah.
Sarah, how about you?
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, right? You don't want your reel to look like everyone else's, but that's also, where if you have something you did that you loved, maybe you did that big flowy DNA assignment from Advanced Motion Methods, can you reskin that to make it your own, right? Can you make slightly different shapes, slightly different colors, and keep the kind of core of the animation you have, but kind of make, a new kit of parts, to just make it look a little bit different. And a lot of students do that in a lot of the classes, actually. I mean, I've had students redesign assignments in After Effects Kickstart all the way through to expression sessions. So, I mean, I think you can certainly make it your own.
I think The way I normally try to talk about it in DRD is that I think they're great to build a skeleton structure of a demo reel that you will eventually swap out with. So like if you only have 2 of your own pieces, that doesn't mean you need to like wait to make a demo reel for 6 more months of making your own stuff or freelance work coming in. You can use them and like even while you create your demo reel, you can even like put a little symbol or like a stroke around it to just say like, oh cool, I need a piece that does this, right? Like I need a piece that has, like you said, swoopy flowing motion, or a piece that's type animation. But then that's a good way to like mark out your next 6 months of personal projects, because you're like, okay, I need 2 seconds of this, I need a half a second here. The one time I think it kind of works sometimes is like I love seeing a flutter cut, you know, like something that's just a bunch of work, but in such a short amount of time that you almost can't really read what it is, but it's just enough to like bring someone's attention forward to the next like full shot. You could stick 5 or 6 shots of like 8 frames, 10 frames, 15 frames of School of Motion stuff as like a ramp to like then reveal like your title card or to reveal a big piece. And I think then it's okay, because it's not like I'm staring at it and be like, oh yeah, I've seen that AMM piece again, or like we said earlier, that ice sculptor has become so prominent that you almost your eyes gloss over a little bit when you see it until you do something extra with it. Those are all really good tips. I got another question here from Daniel saying, is there a chance to learn the best UX or UI practices related to motion graphics inside After Effects Kickstarter? Sarah, what's your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, there's no difference between what makes good UI UX animation and what makes good motion graphics, right? So if you're learning those principles of how to make movement that makes sense, it's going to apply. The difference is when you get into UX, the motion, it's not the showcase, right? With UX animation, motion is kind of ideally something you don't really notice, right? It's guiding you to what you're supposed to be doing or what the application is doing. But it still incorporates all of that stuff that you would learn of, you know, how to make good motion, how to use the tools to create the thing you need to make.
Yeah, I will yes and that 1,000%, that I think After Effects Kickstart does a really good job if you are a designer or you've done interface design and you want to add animation. It lets you have the language skills. Like I think that's one of the hardest things trying to get in animation, is just understanding what all these phrases are that people are using. Like I've said posing, time, and spacing a million times just in this conversation, but if you don't understand what that refers to, right? Like timing are your keys, and the distance between those keys, and the spacing is the curves in between. Like, do you anticipate? Do you slow down? Do you speed up? If you don't know that and you're in the room and someone's saying, okay, you know, like tighten up your spacing, not having that language really can hurt you, right? Like even if you're a interactive designer or just a designer and you want to learn that, After Effects Kickstart will get you there. It's not that it will go over Lottie or body moving. There's lots of places within School of Motion where we talk about those kinds of things. But I do think it's a really great place if you're interested to like shore up those language skills and kind of stoke your curiosity, see if it's something you want to go further in. Jen Van Horn actually asked a great question of Katrina. She said, is there a studio or type of animation piece that you want to work on in the future that you haven't had a chance to yet? You said you moved to LA. You've probably had a chance to work with a lot of different kinds of places and different kind of art directors, but is there something out there that you're searching for?
You know, I've always actually really loved explainer videos because of the fact that they're, you know, they can be less commercial and they can be, you know, educational, informational, stuff like that. Like, you know, like a Vox style explainer video would be something that would be really awesome to work on.
Yeah, no, those are great, because that's one thing that's interesting. We talked about this earlier, that, you know, like as a character animator, you don't get a lot of chance to act. And as a motion designer, even separate from character, there's not a lot of like traditional storytelling opportunities, like real, like having an arc and trying to do something that introduces an idea and have a conflict and kind of result. Explainers get you really close to that, and they get you close to it where you can really exercise those chops without having to have a huge amount of, you know, pre-production work to create full sets of characters. Like it's like a low stakes way to like see if you like trying to learn how to do storytelling, which is pretty cool. You know what? I was going to ask you, you know, you said you moved to LA. Why did you move to LA? I think that's a big question that comes up. Like a lot of people ask me, do I have to? Should I? Like, is it scary? Am I going to leave after 6 months? What was the decision that went into that? And what was that like, those first 6 months moving to LA?
Well, I'm not from New York, so, you know, those are both known to be like great cities for motion design. I'm from California. I'm from from San Francisco, so it was more of like a personal reason to move. But I mean, it helped to also know that it was, you know, a place where there was a lot of motion design going on. When I moved in 2018, that's when I started, really taking a lot of School of Motion courses because I didn't want to have to jump into freelancing right away, and also because I wanted to get used to driving. I wasn't used to doing that in New
Yeah.
York, and so that's when I started taking Cinema 4D, illustration for motion, advanced motion methods, and that was when School of Motion courses really helped me to gain a lot of confidence in my work, and also be a lot more comfortable with raising my rate and saying no to rates that were too low, just knowing when I felt okay with saying no to something, and sometimes I would be surprised and they would meet my rate. So, that that confidence was really important.
Yeah, that's always one of the things that I think I always talk about the TAs being like the hidden kind of ingredient for School of Motion, but I think the community is kind of the secret sauce that we have those frank conversations, right? Like it's sometimes it's hard to ask questions about things like that, about contracts or dealing with the hold system, or especially like rates. Sometimes I've literally been in rooms where people told me to stop talking when I asked very quietly that a person next to me, is my rate too low? Because I didn't know. We didn't have that kind of community. But at the Square, within your classes, there's a lot of opportunity to bring up those questions, to ask those kind of hard to ask, or you might be intimidated to. Those are really great tips. This is more of a statement I just want to bring up because I think it really goes to what you've been talking about, Katrina, and even I think Animation Bootcamp. Mike, I think this is Mike from Milwaukee in the YouTube chat, said there's a tool called MG Curve Offsetter that used to make doing something in Ice Sculptor so easy, but I don't think it works anymore. And the guy who made it seems to have disappeared off the internet. I wanted to mention that I think that's one of the really great things about even After Effects Kickstarter Bootcamp is that there are a ton of tools like Ease and Whiz and Flow and Nut. There's tons of tools out there that will help you get, posing and timing and spacing kind of semi-automatically, but it's really hard to understand what the reasons are behind them if you're just really relying on the button to press. We all do it, right? When we first start, we hit F9, you're like, wow, that looks better, but we don't necessarily know why, and we don't know how to control it. But really being able to go into the tools and play with the curves, play with the speed graph, and see what those differences are. That's a huge reason. The tools can come afterwards. The tools can be a shortcut to speed that up. But I think it's important to note that that's really the essence, I think, of being an animator. I see you nodding your head a lot right now, Sarah. I wonder, have you had experience with tools and
Yeah, the tools are helpful, but you have to know why you might use that tool and when you might use that tool. If you're just, you're just hitting F9 and you don't know why, an easy ease curve is not always going to be what you need. So you have to understand the why, what they do, and then they can speed up your workflow. But if you don't have that why, you're just kind of shooting in the dark,
Yeah, I can give a very funny an anecdote. I used to use Ease and Whiz all the time, but I really hated that it would apply it to everything in whatever channel you select. If you have a position channel and you press it, it's going to give the same easing curve to every single keyframe. And I got so frustrated because everything just felt like spongy, no matter what. It always felt I felt soft. I'm like, oh, I want to make something snappy, but right here I want it to be soft. And I never thought to do this before, but I forgot where somebody gave me the idea. I literally took a square moving left to right, same distance, and applied each Ease and Whiz preset and then baked it to keyframes and then tried to recreate it with just pulling the tangent handles. I was like, oh, now I know what those, that's how far I had to go to just be I don't understand. I knew it in 2D animation. I understood what timing and space was, but in After Effects, seeing a mathematical representation of something you just internalize, it's kind of weird. It's kind of freaky when you first start trying to experiment and play with it and go down another level.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do, and you can do this with, on-screen tools now, but we used to take a sheet of acetate, right? And you tape it over your monitor, and then you use a dry erase marker, and you literally trace your spacing frame by frame to see what is my character's hand doing? Is the path right? Is it an arc or is it janky all over the place? And that's really how you get to know those curves intimately, right?
This is 1,000% showing my age, like we said we weren't going to do earlier, Sarah. But I did the same thing, but I did it without acetate and with a Sharpie marker instead of a dry erase marker at one of my first jobs. So yeah, that was a pricey first freelance booking that I can only admit now, 20 years later. Katrina, I was going to ask you. We just mentioned we don't talk about this much, but we were talking about animation tools. Are there any plugins or scripts or tools that you rely on for working inside After Effects when you're animating?
I've always been a little wary to start getting a ton of plugins because I I was afraid of like relying on them too much. But I have to say that Ease Copy has been super helpful. I use that all the time. Yeah, that's one of the main ones.
Yeah.
I'm not a big plugin person yet. So
Yes. You should check out, if you haven't checked out Flow. Flow is really awesome. It's really fun, but it's only like at its default setting, it's only like 50% useful because there's a setting. I don't know if it's still hidden anymore or if it's actually just available. It used to be hidden. You have to know like a secret key combination. But if you go to the settings, you can make it so that when you pull your curves, if you have a key selected, it'll interactively change it. You don't have to like move it and then hit apply. And then it feels a lot more like you're working in like Cinema 4D. But if anybody's watching this, you said Ease Copy, right? Is that the one that you mentioned? That is, I don't know. I really don't understand how anybody animates in After Effects without that. Because like if you have two different things in two different places, but I think we mentioned this with Javier's ice sculptor piece, that all the eases and all of the spacing, it feels uniform, right? Like everything feels like it's been animated by the same hand, and that's hard to do. You know, like if you want everything to kind of come to a stop throughout your piece the same way, so it feels like uniform, like your designs are uniform, right? Like in design language, you use the same thickness of a stroke or the same fonts or the same color, but we don't talk about this often. Animation actually benefits from having like a similarity in like the timing or the posing or the spacing, so it feels like it's all from the same hand. Ease Copy lets you do that. You can have 7 keys with each one of them in order having a different type of like handle, like a tangent handle or a spacing. And then if you have another 7 somewhere else, you just highlight the 7, you hit copy, and then when you go down to, they can have totally different values, right? The position, but they have totally different values, but you make them all have the same kind of profile, like the same kind of curve easing. It's like 1000% essential. I don't even know how I used to use After Effects without having it, because it would, I know how I used to use it. Stuff just wouldn't look the same. It just wouldn't have the same profile. It would just be like wildly different across the different things. So that's a great tip. Sarah, anything for you that is just like become essential to you?
Yeah, you know well, Flow is one of them. And what I love about that is it goes back to like the tool is it's a tool for you, right? So I can create my own easing presets in Flow that I can then apply to different projects. And then the thing that I've started doing with everything is I use K-Bar, and all the things that I do all the time, I've set those up as buttons, or even just customizing your own shortcut keys. Like for example, you can set a shortcut key for Ease Copy, and it just makes it that much faster.
Oh, it's so much better. Yeah. I mean, I've actually gotten to the point where like, if you buy Flow and download it, I think my presets are like the top ones. So you can grab those. But what I really like is per project, you can set separate presets so that, you know what, if you only, this is actually a good UI UX trick, to be totally honest, that there are certain eases that can be mathematically produced versus like hand pulled. And like, you can have those presets. So the only eases you're using are ones that translate very like directly to something for UI UX world. So you don't have to worry about it, your animation not looking exactly like what you build in After Effects. But yeah, there is a wild and crazy world where we should probably one day actually have just like a discussion about, so what are all those crazy scripts you use? What are those different like things that kind of work, make your day go faster or easier? Let me see. I don't know if we have any more questions right now. Did you see anything else, Sarah, that popped up in the chat, or anything that showed up in our notes? Because otherwise I think that's it. Katrina, anything you want to send off people who are thinking about taking a school of motion class, might be on the fence? We have a couple days left. I think registration ends Sunday, because classes I think are starting on Monday. There might be somebody here who's like, man, I don't know, should I do it? Which one should I pick? Any advice for anybody, Katrina?
I mean, personally, I always like to make sure that I have like the right mindset and the amount of time to dedicate to a school of motion course. I mean, I know that they are expensive, but they have a lot of value, and you get the most value out of them if you can really go through the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, they've helped me so much in my career. Like, I can't stress that enough. Like, just the amount that I improved once I moved to LA, because I had taken so many courses, like it was just like so easy for me to, you know, just see that for myself. And, you know, sometimes it's harder for you to see it yourself, but yeah, I mean, the School of Motion courses are just really great. You know, all of the instructors are really good at teaching. The way that the curriculum is structured is, you know, is just great for learning each of the subjects.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and even being inspired by the other students in your class is a part of it, because, you know, you upload your projects. Like, for example, in advanced motion methods, like Jake Bartlett was in our class. I think I took it the same time that you did, Sarah. And I remember I saw his first assignment that he posted, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. How did he do that? And so I downloaded his project, looked through his comps, and I was just like, oh, okay, well, that's like really helpful. And, you know, you get to do stuff like that, and you can ask your TAs like questions at any time during the course about things that you're having trouble with. It's just a really, really good way to learn any of these subjects.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that's one of the underrated elements, is that most of the time you're so busy doing your own work that you forget that, you know, everybody's being critiqued, but at the same time, everyone's files are available. Like, that's a huge, huge benefit that sometimes I feel like I've learned so much, even from like, because of like hold frames. Like, you can buy a hold frame project and you can just pull down. You're like, I would never have rigged, you know, this stuff up this way, or I would never have used 3D to do something that in the end is totally, you know, looks like 2D. Being able to get into those files and really dig, and then ask questions too, right? If those people are taking this class at the same time as you, really being able to like just get into a chat somewhere and be like, wait, like, why do you have so many nulls in your file? I have no idea what's going on. Like, why is your character rig 6 nulls parented to each other? Like, there's good reasons for things you probably would never think to do. And frankly, like, the instructor may never have thought to do as well. That is a great tip. I just want to let everybody know, you know, like we said, registration is coming to a close for this session. And on top of that, next session after that, the winter session, some of our courses are going to be taking a little bit of a break. So some classes like Demo Reel Dash, the aforementioned twice appearing expression session is going to be going on for a little break. If you want to hop into that, it's a great class to take. It's actually a great class to take if you're ever thinking about taking AMM. And also, Lights Camera Render is one I just love to highlight, because as much as it is a 3D class, it's also in some ways a design class. In other ways, it's also an animation class. And it's obviously 3D and it focuses its tools on Octane, but there is so much stuff in that class that applies to everything beyond just trying to learn this one render package, which is probably why it's called Lights Camera Render and not Octane for motion design. But in that list, I mean, I know you've taken so many, Katrina. If you were going to take another class, is there one that's in the back of your head that you're thinking about taking one day?
You know, I watched the 3D live stream a couple of days ago, and I've been holding off on the 3D classes just because I feel like I do want to go back to C40 Basecamp first and just like review stuff. But I started thinking like, those look like a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we'll see.
Good. Well, just another tool, just another thing to add to the list of stuff you're already great at. Well, Katrina, I want to say thank you so much for your time. Sarah, thank you so much for doing these critiques. I think for me, it was just eye-opening again to remember, like, wow, this is how far and how in detail TAs can go, especially on these big projects that you put a lot of time and effort into. Thank you both. This was awesome. And as Katrina mentioned, I wanted to say this wraps up Student Showcase. This is it. We've done 3 in a row for 3 days. If you've enjoyed this and you haven't seen yesterday's design stream or the day before that with EJ, the 3D stream, those are great places to get a better understanding of some of these courses that maybe you've been on the fence or you're not sure if it's right for you. Take a look and watch those, because there have been some great examples of very different backgrounds and experiences taking design classes, taking 3D classes, and they might help you figure out which one would be the right one for you next. So I think with that, thank you, everyone. We're probably going to sign off. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.